Most murder cases begin with evidence: a body, a weapon, a witness who saw something they wish they hadn't. But in 2013, a Texas courtroom delivered a murder conviction in a case that had none of those things. No body, no physical evidence, no eyewitnesses, no confirmed crime scene. A woman answered a late-night phone call, stepped outside her apartment, and vanished into the night. Months later, a man was sentenced to decades in prison for killing her. Yet to this day, no one is ever proven that a murder actually happened. This is the case of Laura Bennett, a disappearance that turned into a conviction and a mystery that still refuses to settle. On April 5, 2012, 34-year-old Laura Bennett was home in her small apartment just outside Houston, Texas. Friends described Laura as quiet, responsible, and routine-driven. She worked as a medical billing clerk and rarely strayed far from her normal schedule. Every evening, she called her mother. Every morning, she arrived at work on time. Nothing about her life suggested someone preparing to disappear. That Thursday night seemed ordinary. Laura had returned from work, eaten dinner, and settled in for a quiet evening at home. At 10:42 p.m., her phone rang. Phone records later confirmed the call lasted just under 2 minutes. What was said during that brief conversation remains unknown. But shortly afterward, a neighbor heard Laura's apartment door open. Footsteps moved quickly down the hallway. Then everything went quiet. Laura Bennett was never seen again. At first, no one realized something was wrong. Laura's car remained parked outside her apartment complex. Her purse and wallet were still inside. Her medication sat untouched on the kitchen counter. The television in the living room had been left on. But Laura never showed up for work the next morning. When coworkers tried calling her, the phone went straight to voicemail. By the second day, her family became worried. Laura had never gone silent like this before. She always returned calls. She always checked in. Finally, her sister contacted the police and requested a welfare check. When officers entered the apartment, they found no signs of a struggle, no broken furniture, no blood. Everything appeared perfectly normal, except for one thing. Laura herself was gone. At first, investigators treated the case as a missing person report. Adults sometimes leave voluntarily. People start new lives without warning. But Laura's situation felt different. She had left behind her car, her personal belongings, and the routines she's followed every day. There had been no unusual withdrawals from her bank account, no travel plans, no messages suggesting she intended to leave. For detectives, the sudden break in her routine raised alarm bells, so they began looking at the people closest to her. One name surfaced quickly: Daniel Reeves, Laura's former boyfriend. Laura and Daniel had broken up several months before she disappeared. According to friends, the relationship had been intense and often argumentative. Several people described Daniel as jealous and unwilling to accept the breakup. But there had never been any police reports involving violence. Still, investigators wanted to speak with him. During their investigation, detectives discovered something interesting about the phone call Laura received that night. It came from a prepaid cell phone, a phone that had been purchased weeks earlier at a convenience store. Surveillance footage showed a man who resembled Daniel buying the device. The video wasn't perfectly clear. Investigators could not positively identify him, but it was enough to focus their attention. Detectives began to believe Laura had gone outside that night to meet Daniel, and that something had gone terribly wrong. But as the investigation continued, detectives faced a serious problem. They couldn't prove any of it. No neighbor reported seeing Daniel at the apartment complex that night. Security cameras in the area showed nothing. Cell phone records placed Daniel's personal phone miles away during the time Laura disappeared. Police searched nearby woods, fields, and waterways. They found nothing. No body, no weapon, no blood, no crime scene.
Still, prosecutors believed they had enough to pursue charges.
They argued that Laura's disappearance itself pointed to murder. Cases without a body are known as no-body homicide cases. They are rare and extremely difficult to prove. Without physical evidence, prosecutors must rely on circumstantial clues and patterns of behavior. In Laura's case, they argued she would never have abandoned her life voluntarily. Her family testified about her reliability. Coworkers described her dedication to her job. To prosecutors, the explanation seemed simple. Laura met Daniel that night. An argument happened, and he killed her. But the defense raised an important question. Where was the proof? No forensic evidence connected Daniel to violence. His car contained no traces of blood or signs of cleaning. No witnesses placed him with Laura that night. The prosecution's theory relied almost entirely on interpretation. Still, the case moved forward. When the trial began in 2013, emotions ran high inside the courtroom. Prosecutors focused heavily on the troubled history between Laura and Daniel. They described a troubled ex-boyfriend, angry over the breakup. One coworker testified that Laura had once expressed fear about Daniel's behavior. Another claimed Laura had said, "If something ever happens to me, look at him." The defense challenged the statement immediately. There was no recording, no written message, no evidence the words had ever been spoken, only someone's memory, but the jury heard it anyway. Prosecutors also emphasized the mysterious prepaid phone call as proof Daniel had contacted Laura that night. Yet investigators never recovered the phone itself. They could not prove who actually used it. Still, prosecutors argued the overall picture told a clear story. Laura stepped outside after that call, and she never came back. After weeks of testimony, the jury was sent to deliberate. 2 days later, they returned with a decision. Guilty. Daniel Reeves was convicted of murder and sentenced to 40 years in prison. A case with no body, no witnesses, and no physical evidence had ended with a conviction. For Laura's family, the verdict brought some measure of closure, but outside the courtroom, doubts began to grow. After the trial, independent investigators and journalists began reviewing the case more closely. One detail stood out immediately. Phone records showed Laura's cell phone briefly connected to a tower nearly 70 miles away the morning after she supposedly died. Prosecutors argued the killer must have moved the phone, but analysts pointed out something unusual. The signal pattern resembled normal travel along a highway. Then another detail surfaced. A gas station clerk reported serving a woman who resembled Laura 2 days after her disappearance. There was even security footage, though the image was blurry. Investigators dismissed the sighting early in the case, but critics later questioned why the footage was never shown to jurors. Could the woman in the video have been Laura? No one could say for certain, but it introduced a troubling possibility. Years later, another strange development appeared. A private investigator reviewing the case discovered financial activity tied to Laura's identity. A prepaid debit card opened months before her disappearance had suddenly become active again. Small purchases appeared at grocery stores and gas stations across southern Texas. Initially, authorities suspected identity theft, but something about the receipts raised eyebrows. Some signatures looked strikingly similar to Laura's handwriting. If those signatures were real, it suggested something almost impossible. Laura Bennett might have been alive long after Daniel Reeves was convicted. Officials never confirmed the theory, and the investigation quietly faded again. More than a decade later, Laura Bennett is still missing. Her body has never been found. No physical evidence has ever confirmed she was murdered. Daniel Reeves remains in prison, continuing to insist he is innocent. Some investigators believe Laura may have chosen to disappear voluntarily. Others believe a crime did happen, but the case against Daniel relied too heavily on assumptions. The truth may lie somewhere between those possibilities. Somewhere between that late-night phone call and the courtroom verdict, a mystery became a certainty.
A woman vanished, a man lost decades of his life, and the truce may still be waiting somewhere no one has looked. Because the most unsettling part of this case isn't just that Laura Bennett disappeared, it's that a murder conviction was secured without proof that a murder ever happened. And until Laura Bennett is found, alive or dead, the question will remain: was justice truly served, or was the real story buried long before the trial ever began?